Well, we're back again for episode 3
Three.
of the Friday Council. My name's Nav, and I have Daniel with me,
Yo.
and David.
What's up?
And today we were going to cover the topic of the voting age and the informed
democracy.
informed
versus
democracy. So
what we
I
have
lost
now.
my train of thought there for a second.
I think I really like the informed democracy. It just gets me thinking, and as opposed to, I don't know what you call what we already have, open democracy or something. But the informed democracy is basically in reference to a system that only people who are informed, whatever that may mean, are able to vote, rather than just blanket everyone.
I think,
And I say everyone,
isn't
even though
that,
it's already
that's
18.
probably a contradiction of democracy though, isn't it?
What do you mean?
Well, democracy is that everyone gets to say it, right? So if you're only giving say to certain people, that doesn't really mean... I would need to double check the definition
That's true.
of democracy.
But I mean, we already exclude anyone under 18 by default anyway.
It's valid, yeah. Well, and that's why obviously some people say that that's against a human rights violation or a Bill of Rights violation.
Well, just looked up the meaning of democracy. It's a system of government by the whole population,
Right.
or all the eligible members of a state, typically through elected representatives.
Yeah.
If
And so that is a valid point, though, that technically we already do exclude anyone under a certain age. So it's not technically democracy, a pure democracy.
Democracy.
Or otherwise everyone of any age or any prisoner, which I think prisoners do get to vote here now. But yeah, theoretically, if it's a democracy, everyone should have a say no matter what, if they want to.
Technically, being technical, yeah.
I guess, you go first. What were you gonna say?
I don't know about you guys, but I'm kind of pro informed democracy. In my head, it'd be like, I assume it's like taking a driver's license test. You do a little test, and then you're in.
It's just one of these
It
ones
opens
where
up a can of worms.
I think, in theory sounds good, and I'm not saying I'm 100% against it, but then you just end up at the point, well, technically authoritarian dictatorships sound good with, like, some of they do come with pros, so, like, it's like a sliding scale, right? Like, dictators can get stuff done way more efficiently than a democracy because they just have to, there's no, like, bureaucracy to go through to say, like, I want this built or I want this done, and it gets done, whereas in a democracy you have a whole lot of bureaucracy. So it's kind of, it's a slippery slope one, I think.
Yeah, I was thinking, when you bring it back down to the core, how would you define the term informed? Like, is it controlled by, like, the government, for example, like, who outlines the criteria that would make you, quote, informed?
Yeah. After the initial test, or the initial test formation would be somewhat inefficient, no matter what you do. But I think it'd be
probably just
it should be easy. But I think a lot of people just don't care, and they still have a vote and feel obliged to vote when I don't think they necessarily should, whether they want to or not. You know, if you don't care enough to participate, then I don't think you should be expected to, really, or even be able to. You should be able to show some competence. And a competence test, I'm thinking, wouldn't be anything crazy. It'd be very easy, but it would require some learning of how our democracy works or how our government system works. Just a basic understanding of how bills are passed,
So perhaps you would have, like, certain criteria, whether that be like a small amount of history lesson, or like how the economy works in New Zealand.
Like what the OCR does, and
I just don't know how you could.
Yeah, it seems
But
like,
I'm not even saying like that. It's, I think in theory that sounds good, but how do you, like, make that a practical thing? Like, how do you prove that you know these things? And, like, if you have to prove them, then that's going to be, like, super impractical. If you have, like, 4 million people having to, like, take a test to prove that they're competent, and that's going to cost a lot of money.
Yeah, well, that would be a thing. Would it be a one-time test where you take it upon a certain age, or is it something that you would have to renew every 5 to 10 years, or
Yeah, I
2
reckon-
years, like a passport?
I reckon you
kind of
could
thing?
renew it, but I'm sure like just counting votes and the whole election process takes a lot of time and money anyway. So I think
sure.
realistically it'd be drastically reduced the amount of people that would vote who would care enough to do those tests. It would be quite low, I think. And then you'll get a certain proportion or sector of the population that are going to be interested in it. But I don't know. I always think, do people, when we're all voting in New Zealand, do we vote based on what we individually want, or do we really think of New Zealand as a team and you're voting for what's best for the team, even though it might put you at a disadvantage?
Yeah.
And what, is that right or wrong? Like which one's right or wrong, do you guys reckon?
I
Vote
think, well, for
individually,
me
or-
personally, you try and weigh up a bit of both, because realistically, you could vote specifically on things that affect you personally, but then there will be things that don't by default. So then you're weighing up the good of society as a whole. But yeah, like everyone has their own different opinion, which is great. I think that's an awesome thing about living in like a democracy. We have different opinions and thoughts and ideas, which is kind of why we wanted to come together and do this podcast and learn more and understand. Yeah, it's a hard one. I think I would probably weigh up personal aspects higher, and just looking at ways that I would be able to use it to my advantage, or how I could better myself or my family, and how we'd grow in that sense.
Yeah, I think, or people should be voting for personal reasons, because I think it's like if everyone votes for personal reasons, that's like it will end up as a fair representation of the collective, essentially.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually.
But I don't think that a lot of people do vote for that. I think a lot of people just vote for based on what they think should be, or just like who they like who the flavour of the month is. Like, this candidate seems like a really cool or funny person. So they don't really think about it deeply at all. Yeah. I think a decent portion of the population just votes what seems cool or right, or without any real thought behind why.
I also think, like you're saying, in terms of arguing for informed democracy, certain parties may utilize that to their advantage, in the sense that they wouldn't offer true policies, but more of, I don't want to say like bribery, but certain hey, we're going to give you this.
Yeah, I think,
especially leading up to election years.
I think that already happens to a reasonable degree anyway. Yeah.
What do you mean exactly?
Well, like tax cuts, or we'll give you a tax cut, or a benefit, whatever it is, we'll give you a certain allowance, whatever.
Yeah, like if you're a student, for example, or if you're renting a house.
Isn't it? I'd argue that wouldn't that be more of an issue in an uninformed democracy, because you can majority of people may be more easily manipulated, or young people especially, I don't know, but you can do that. Student
don't know. It's an issue. I think that's going to be an issue full stop, regardless of the system. I think that already happens and would happen under any system you had, I think.
Speaking of young people, so like potentially reducing the vote age or increasing it, what do you think, David? I know you have. Yeah,
I strongly think that it should be raised significantly.
Raised.
I know it won't be, but I think it should be. I think it should be like 25.
Yeah, right. Why?
Because young people are stupid.
Yes.
That includes myself when I was young.
Yeah, or you can make that argument that there are very stupid adults out there.
That's true as well.
And we're assuming by 25, we're assuming. I mean, we're kind of saying now that we kind of think we have a good grasp on it, but I wonder if that will change.
Of course, you're always going to be biased, because you're always going to say it's going to be. You're never going to say it should be older than what your age currently is. I think 25 would be good for multiple reasons. I think scientifically, that's like when your frontal lobe is fully developed. So I think that alone is a good reason. And again, you're never going to have the perfect age, because there's stupid adults as well. But I think in the pool of people by the age of 25 and stupidity and life experience, just all of that, would be significantly better than the pool of people that you get like 18 years old. When, I mean, that's just super young. It really is super young when you think about it.
Yeah, I think when just looking at it from a personal perspective, like at 18 years old, I had no clue what I wanted to do in life, or what. Sometimes you even think about that now. It's what to do, or but yeah, like just thinking back on like the personal experiences and the dumb things you got up to when you're 18, and now you're using that as an example to vote. I don't think that qualifies you automatically. So I'd probably be in the case of potentially raising it. I don't know the exact age, maybe 21, like a small step, or we could go up to 25. But if you look at it from a perspective that you're trying to lower it, but you also have like economic incentives, so you can work from the age of 16, I believe. Was it 15 or 16? Should you be included and have the right to vote based on the fact that you're contributing to the economy?
I think, when you're that, there's, of course, there'll always be exceptions, but there's going to be few people who are 16 and still few people are 18 who, even though they may have part-time employment, have like full-time employment and responsibilities like their own house or whatever, bills to pay. Most people, I would say at least 90%, if not 95% of people 18 or below are like dependent on their parents still, and therefore they may have part-time work, but it's not like work in the sense that a 25-year-old, most 25-year-olds will have, where they probably have like, they're pretty much responsible for themselves now. They've got bills to pay, whether that's rent, a mortgage, and like you just, it's I think by 25, a good portion of people, because most people should be finished university by that age, and into the workforce full time. So that's another way you could flip it, and you could say the criteria is that you have to have a full-time job.
Yeah, that kind of works like an informed. You're kind of filtering out the uninformed in a way, just by raising the age. Naturally, you're going to have. So say it was 25, you're naturally going to have a more of a proportion of people who are paying taxes, are understanding. When you get a house, you have to kind of understand interest rates and OCR. So that's kind of a way to filter it out. And
I think when you're
population.
very young and working part-time or whatever, or even if you're working full-time but just live still like a fairly sheltered life, so like living at home rent-free or whatever, and just don't have bills, responsibilities, it's very easy then to like have an idealistic worldview, like tax everyone into oblivion and put all these restrictions in place and stuff like that, and because you don't have that understanding of what it's like to earn your own money and have to save it up, and like how hard all that stuff is. So it's easy for you to just sit there and be like, put all these restrictions in place and make life hard for everyone, because that doesn't affect you, because you're not earning large sums of money, and you don't have to think about saving your money to pay bills and things like that. And I was like I was that way when I was young. So I'm speaking from first-hand experience. Like I voted for the Green Party the first time I voted when I was 18 or 19, whatever I was at the age of that election, because I thought like the other side of the government was all corrupt, and like they were only in business for wealthy people, and like cut these people, because I was living at home on a benefit at the time, I think. So I was doing nothing with my life, so it's easy to have that worldview, because I wasn't thinking about like the impacts that those have on people.
Real people. It's easy to have that worldview full stop when you decide, okay, this party is for rich business people. This party cares about poor people. This party's about the environment. Because I think in a lot of ways, modern life can be way too complicated, especially when you're kind of grinding a 9 to 5 and everyone's working more hours than they kind of ever have, and who's got time to learn how a bill is passed in New Zealand government, and all these boring little policies. When it's like a free first-year university, it's a real easy concept to grasp. It's not. It's not difficult to grasp.
I think there's a lot of different variables that play into just ticking 2 boxes every 3 years.
Yeah.
It's very complicated. There's a lot. Obviously, there's a lot to weigh up, and different. You have social, I guess, social topics. There'll be financial topics. Comes to raising a family. Different. There's so many different aspects that go into just voting for a specific party. What I was gonna ask then, if we're arguing for the case of raising or decreasing the age, should there perhaps be a cap on how old you can be before you're not allowed to vote?
Yeah, I like this. I like that.
Yeah, not against that. Yeah, not against that. Again, it'll never happen, but I'm not personally against that because I think probably again you'd never draw up the perfect age, but when you get old, you get stuck in your ways and you don't keep up with the times essentially as a generalization. You just hold the same views that you've held for the past 10 or 20 years and you're not open to new ideas. And I see that all the time living with boomer parents. And that's not to say that that's always like an invalid way of thinking, but if you just had if it was only those people in the voting pool, like we'd never make any progress because they don't want anything to change.
And right now they're becoming a bigger and bigger swath. Like they're getting quite old, that boomer population, and that's the other majority. And how democracy works is like mob rule. Basically, it's the majority rule. So when they makes up such a large proportion of the population, and they're all so old,
and I think
they're so out of
also it's probably like technically, like scientifically provable that as you age, like your cognitive abilities decrease as well. There'll be some scientific, again, you're never going to draw up a perfect age because every human's going to be different. But as a generalization, you probably say that people over 80 have suffered a significant amount of cognitive decline.
And you can look at it the other end. So effectively what we say as a country when the voting age is 18 is that, we think might be 50%. We might say, at 18, we reckon there's about just more than half of 18-year-olds are competent enough. So we're happy to let that age group in. And 17 might be less than half, so it's not worth it. And
I don't think it's anywhere near half, though.
No, I don't either.
I think it'd be like 10%. Yeah. And again, that's me speaking openly honestly about what I truly believe I was like when I was 18.
I don't even know, without taking a special interest, how much you'd ever learn about politics in New Zealand. You get what you get from the news.
Yeah, not much.
And that's real shallow. They only have 5-10 minutes to teach you. They're not there to teach you anyway. They're there to make something juicy.
Well, I've made this point before. I think if you look at just how much the vote in New Zealand swings between left and right, it shows that most people don't really have any concrete principles. And I'm not saying, because obviously if you're too concrete, like you're never open to change your mind, that's not a good thing either. But I think the way that the vote swings so much compared to America, where you only get little swings between left and right, it shows like most people, I think, are voting based on like the personality, essentially. Like, cool, like John Key, this guy's funny, he's relatable, it's one of the boys. And Jacinda, it's, oh, cool, she's like
relatable.
Yeah. So it's not about like principles or it's just like, oh yeah, she seems like a great leader, or he seems like a great leader, I'll vote for her or him.
Yeah.
Without like really caring about the fundamentals of
it. In that article that I read, there's the theory that there's a large swath, and maybe in New Zealand especially, that will flip, and so apparently there's a large chunk of people that will, and fair enough as well, base their vote off how their lives personally have been affected in whatever current government 4-year cycle it was, and if it was bad, they'll just flip. Like no matter what, if it was good, they stick the same. And as a way of voting, I think that's pretty good. You don't need to know really anything. You just need to know what happened. But the downside of that I can see is the parties realizing that and then going for real short-term good things. And then kind of palming it off.
Yeah. I also think that there's probably a lot of luck involved with that as well, because
A government can do something 20 years ago that finally manifests.
Yeah, that and other things outside government control, like economic cycles, and like what's happening in other parts of the world has knock-on effects. You know,
true.
like right with the 2008 recession, obviously with COVID more recently, like started somewhere else and affected us. And it's, sort of, obviously the government can then react to that, but a lot of it is just like, outside of government policy, it's other factors that are happening, and the government just gets blamed for it, or gets the credit for it, probably unduly.
Yes, and that's the kind of a problem. What do you guys think about the 4 year? It's 4 years in New Zealand, right? Terms?
Three
years. Yeah, no,
3 year.
4 years in the States.
3 year term. Yeah, I wouldn't be part of the informed democracy. The 3 year terms. Is that too short? Does it feel too short?
It's a tough one because you can argue either way. At the moment, it feels too long.
That's the thing. I was going to say exactly the same thing.
If things are going well, I'd be saying it's too short. So that's a tough one. I don't have a strong feeling one way or the other, but I can see the pros and cons of both because that encourages short-term thinking.
Yeah,
but
like
equally,
dealing with climate, whatever your views on climate change, trying to deal with that is going to be, if you're going to deal with it, is a real long-term thing.
Yeah,
and flipping back and forward is not. It's going to make nothing.
But then, if I didn't like the way things are going, it'd be like, oh man, 4 years is way too long. So, it's a tough one. I see the case for both sides. Yeah,
for sure.
Because it's a good thing, because say if things aren't going well, you can you can change it faster. But if things are going well, or even if it's just average, it can still encourage shorter term thinking, which is genuinely not a good thing. Government focusing on things to like stay in power rather than focusing on things that are beneficial, like truly good for the country.
I mean, I'm just thinking back in terms of New Zealand. In the past, we've had certain events that would kind of dictate when you have something like to look forward to. So for example, we had the Rugby World Cup in 2007, I believe. Is that
11.
Right? 11, sorry. 2007 was France. Won't go into that. 2011. So post-earthquake, that was like New Zealand's big ticket item. We have things like the America's Cup, but it seems you'd often go through periods of time where just not much is going on. So I think now you've had the pandemic, and that's, I would argue, sort of coming towards a close. Then what do you base off like your decisions
as a civilian?
As a civilian in terms of voting. So like when you're thinking quite short term, I feel like you're kind of in like a limbo phase. Whereas if there's something huge or like a big infrastructure plan,
and I think just a side note, like this is one of the benefits of like a dictatorship, right? They can think very long term. So to say they're actually beneficials, not that I think overall it's a net negative dictatorships, but that's one of the benefits is they can think long term because they don't have to worry about losing power. And that can, in the case of like China most recently, they get a lot of shit done.
It's kind of like going all in. You're either going to get a horrible time or you're going to get a great
or I think you can get a bit of both, because I think like there's a lot of horrible things in China. I would rather live in New Zealand than China for sure, with the freedoms we have. But China are way better at getting like projects done than us. Like they have like massive infrastructure projects that get done easily because they can think long term. And again, there's no like, whereas you see this in New Zealand, where's the money going to come from? I'm like, right, in China, it doesn't matter. They just find the money, get it done. There's no, you're not going to be able to afford this, or like you can't give tax cuts if you also want to keep infrastructure.
I do like about China, I don't know the exact details, but they have it where it's compulsory. If you want to get into the national kind of office or governmental office there, you have, there's like a mandatory time served at different levels of society. So you have to start out with your like effectively district like council member or something, and then you can go to city, and it's explicitly written. You can't just have some businessman jump in automatically right up the top.
Kind of like you'd have like
who has heaps of funding,
which is
for advertising.
exactly how the
John
past
Key.
two national leaders.
I was going to say
exactly
John Key and Christopher Luxon coming from big positions in private. from a private sense.
I think when you come from more local, when you're sorting out local
Yeah.
problems or representing local issues, it kind of really ties down your soul, I think, to that place
Yep.
and to the people when you have a real grassroots. 'Cause
Yeah,
I think like John Key was born into wealth, wasn't he?
No, he wasn't. He was born into a state house.
Yeah.
Oh,
No,
that's right.
he
Was it
went-
what about Christopher Luxon?
I don't know about his backstory. I think he was modest background as well. I
Yeah.
think from what I've read, I remember.
Yeah. You're right about John Key, though. I remember that.
Yeah.
Yeah. State House guy.
Yeah, went to Burnside, I think, high school. So like didn't go to Stack or Christ or anything like that. So
Yeah, that would I wager that would have helped him a lot. Actually, I don't know if like those.
yeah, well, I think that's probably why you saw that he was still a
Yeah.
relatable guy. Like
Yeah.
he was a super wealthy guy when he was prime minister, but a common man could relate to him probably
Yes.
because
And he could relate to the common man.
exactly probably because he had those modest roots.
Mm.
Whereas I think, again, generalization, there will always be exceptions, but as a generalization, I think if you're born into wealth, you can be quite out of touch, with the common man because your life is a bubble essentially.
Mm.
Now I've seen the opposites of that where wealthy people like go striving to like find discomfort and poverty and things like that because they're cognizant of the fact that they are born into wealth. But as a generalization, I think,
Yeah.
um,
Because you have to be cognizant of that to want to do it. Otherwise, everyone else is forced to know whether they like it or not. Of the common man, the concept of the common man's interesting as well. I think probably more people than what constitutes the common man would consider themselves common men. You know what I mean? So like the more wealthier than us,
they'll
would
be
say,
like,
we're the common man. We're like upper
for
middle
sure,
class.
for sure.
And then the middle class say, we're the common man.
Yeah,
And then the lower class as well.
Probably
we're common.
You could tie it into anyone on like a salary of probably between 50,000 and 150,000
as common men.
would consider themselves common men as a generalization. But there's a significant difference between the person on 50k and 150k.
Yeah.
But they probably both, in most cases, consider themselves common men.
Yeah, that brings to mind another reason I thought that the informed democracy could work maybe now rather than any other time is with the internet being accessible from all classes of people. So there's no real excuse especially if it's a relatively easy, straightforward test. You just have to want to do it and go do it. Then with the internet now, anyone could do that. There's not as many barriers because otherwise the immediate obvious barriers, you go, well, only rich people, well educated.
People will still make that argument though.
They will, yeah.
They'll say, like that they'll discriminate against poor people.
Yeah.
And you'll say, what about the library? Oh, but then they don't have time to go to the library because they're spending all their time working.
Yeah, I think we've gone further than that. Even now that I think even those poorest of poor will surely have internet now.
Yeah,
for the but most part, or at least can go to a library, right?
Yeah, there's different, I guess.
But they'll say that they're too busy to or something. Like I remember that was like a big thing with vaccination.
Yeah,
when they were talking about Maori Pacifica vaccination, it was just like, they don't have time to go and stuff because like they're so busy like trying to look after their families and stuff. So people say the same
I'm sympathetic
thing.
to that idea. I don't know if it applies directly to that proportion of people, but in general, like we're so busy and distracted now that
fair.
It is probably harder than if someone is born into wealth, only has to work 3 days a week and a cruisy job.
You also
all
have
that time to play around mentally.
different things, I guess, in terms of like resources. So it may be easier for someone, let's just say like has an iPhone, for example. You would argue that would get you a lot further than a cheap $100 smartphone, or someone who has to take public transport to get around as opposed to someone who's got access to a car.
I think that was another one, with the
Commute
vaccination
time.
was the fact that, like lack of transport and stuff like that. It was another reason,
It seems something, I guess, a lot of us might take for granted. Like,
fear.
I just assume most people
Yep.
get around by car because I drive a car. So if I want to get somewhere, I hop out the door, I'm in the car and good to go. Whereas for some people,
it's a big deal.
it's a huge deal. You might
It's
have
very
to
fair.
take one bus to somewhere, take
And
a
another.
transfer, catch another.
like an hour of
That's
your
your
time.
time gone. Yeah,
That's a lot of
is the most
time.
important thing.
So in that sense, arguing for example for public transport, you have different benefits. So for example, you may be able to read a book in that time, or listen to a certain thing, or watch video and like learn as that time you would take driving.
Yeah,
If you
it's a good way of looking
Yeah.
at it, but most people again like throw that in your face.
Yeah.
Oh, it's just like that's not like feasible and stuff like that. But that's the way I would look at it. It's
Yeah.
like make the best of your crap situation.
And also, you got thinking of an informed democracy again. It's not doesn't really even have to come into the conversation whether it's fair for everyone. Do we think it would turn out a better society for everyone? Regardless of whether everyone has access to be able to choose, it's possible at least that the people who would have access to voting would choose the best anyway, because they have maybe a better understanding of what's better for everybody.
Yeah,
yes
I
and
don't
no.
know because
don't know.
again, and this is like obviously coming from a biased position because I'm always going to be biased to what I vote towards. I would say that there's a lot of like informed people out there who are making bad decisions with their votes as it stands. So just because they're seemingly informed doesn't actually mean that they're informed. But again, that's obviously coming from a highly biased position.
Yeah. Would you say that then, like, voting well or correctly doesn't preclude knowing exactly how the OCR works? Or
I
anything?
think
You can do it with your
that's
heart,
spot
kind
on.
of thing.
I think that's exactly.
Yeah.
Fair.
And I think like the past election was probably the most extreme example of that ever.
People
Where,
voting with their hearts. And
yeah,
their
like
feeling.
like the government essentially got really lucky because a lot of their policies were shit.
Yeah.
But we got lucky with the cases not staying out of the community for a long time when it was just dumb luck. Like it should have got out, but it didn't. Dumb luck, and then it finally got out, and now we're like the rest of the world.
Yeah.
So they were getting credit for essentially a lot of luck.
Yeah. And what government isn't going to take credit for?
Yeah,
anything
for sure.
they
It'll be the
possibly
same.
can?
No,
Totally.
either way.
It's like arguing, for example, and if National were in power, that saying that cases would be exuberantly more than what they were, but you just never know because it didn't happen, it didn't occur.
Yeah.
So, like you're saying, depending on your bias, you would argue more for how you vote or your own personal perspective. I would argue that in a person who's in like informed democracy can think critically to the point that you can recognize the good and the bad from each party. So, like I know people that they'd be first to tell you that one party does X, Y, Z wrong and they're doing this wrong, but then you ask them, the party that you vote for, could you name maybe one thing that they've done wrong, and they could not because their bias is just too
overwhelming.
Yeah, too overwhelming.
Yeah. That's a good point.
Yeah, I think as that last election will go down one for the history books. As you feel like, I don't think you'll ever see quite that same swinging. Oh, I mean, technically you may, but for a very long time, I don't think you'll see it because that was essentially population living in fear, blinded. Yeah, like people were in a. You remember what public sentiment was like. It was very rare that you get like I think 70-80% of the population all like thinking the same way.
Yeah.
And like they were dropping like things that you typically like vote based on like tax cuts or whatever, and basing it just like purely on like the COVID response. And so you had a lot of people essentially dropping like their things that they would normally disagree with other people with because they were prioritizing COVID response, which they agreed on. So you'd have, as they like, two polar opposite people, that one's like for like more taxes and someone for tax cuts, but they both agree that like the COVID response is good. And so they forget the tax cut side of it and be like, yeah, I agree, we both agree that like the COVID response is good, so we'll vote for Labour. So yeah, I think to say that's probably an election for the history books, because I don't think you'll see a swing like that one way for a very long time.
Yeah,
because
you could be right.
essentially, you had a population. I don't know, living in a daze, I'd call it.
Yeah,
I think
in the last 2 years, people would.
It's
describe
changed
it as
a lot now. You see that it swung much back to the typical middle ground.
Up, man.
Yeah, a lot of people are now back to worrying about typical issues.
It does feel like back to normal almost. Yeah, I think that the COVID lockdowns as well can be another example of the detriment to the mob rule democracy, because everyone who doesn't own, business owners, very small minority, I suppose, of the population.
Yeah,
and so when everyone's at home copping free money for the majority, everyone's like, "Woo, this is fine. This is sweet as. Don't have to think about it. I'm safe. I'm nice and safe in my house. Feels good." And all the minority business owners are like hemorrhaging money, and getting reamed and closing down.
Yeah, I think in that period of time, people's priorities became a lot more trivial.
Yeah.
To the point where, you were now arguing about whether or not to wear masks.
Well, I think we were essentially brainwashed, or conditioned, put it a more reasonable way of putting it, to believe like the overarching goal was saving lives. Like that was the goal, and at all costs. So it doesn't matter about anything else except for saving lives. And the funny thing is, now that's no longer the case. So it's like, what was the switch that happened? Because people die from COVID every day in New Zealand now, but most people are fine with that. So it's like, why did we let ourselves get so?
I didn't even know that. Yeah, I didn't know that, because I thought the same thing when it was happening. I was like, well, okay, like you can't really argue that like your grandma should die. Like you never want that to happen. But
there was a period of time where like a huge portion of the population was fully on board with that. That's the overarching goal at all costs. But now it's not that way at all anymore. People dying of COVID, but it's like, you can't save everyone.
And it's suggesting what before the case, when we were at 0 cases, suggesting that was met with hostility.
Yeah, like that was a super that was a very bad opinion to have.
That was a not approved opinion.
Makes me question. I was listening to a podcast by one of Joe Rogan's podcasts, talking to Aaron Rodgers, who's the quarterback of the Green Bay Packers. And he was saying during the time of when COVID was quite rampant in the NFL, and there were some who were vaccinated and unvaccinated. The ones who were unvaccinated had to undergo regular testing every day, but when it came to working out the team, they were segregated, and like unvaccinated were working out in the gym together, whereas those who weren't, they could walk around freely without masks. They could eat together. It didn't matter, because it was the claim that if you were vaccinated, that you were protecting others around you. But when you flip the switch and you're thinking, well, even though then this guy Aaron Rodgers and others weren't vaccinated, surely they would be considered the most safe, because they are undergoing regular testing, whereas those who weren't, who were vaccinated, were getting tested every 2 weeks.
And we had the exact same thing here with like Air New Zealand's policy, where it was if you're vaccinated, you didn't need to do a negative test before you fly. If you're unvaccinated, you had to provide a negative test. So it was unvaccinated people who were the least likely to have COVID and spread COVID on a plane, because they had to prove that they were tested negative a day before or within 24 hours of their flight. So it was actually, unvaccinated people were far less of a threat than vaccinated people, because as we all now know that the vaccine doesn't stop you from getting COVID and it doesn't stop you from spreading it.
And now it seems like the argument is, although because a lot of the data would say that the spread is by vaccinated people, is to say now, well, yeah, of course it is, because the majority of the population is vaccinated, so it makes sense. So there's a bit of cognitive dissonance there.
So much cognitive dissonance.
Yeah, it's like I don't know. I wouldn't know how you would explain that to. I
mean, relating it back, it just really makes people very clearly very in like a daze. It's almost tangible. You
probably the last time that you would have had something like that was like maybe World War II. Obviously, I don't know, because we weren't alive, but something like that where people are like living in fear, so they can easily be like manipulated and drop like
and all the news all the time would have been about the war.
Drop their typical rational thinking. And
like from a personal perspective, I would say, if you wanted to get vaccinated, if you didn't want to, absolutely fine.
Yeah.
If you want to, go about your business with the sense that we want to protect those who are vulnerable. So you'll have immunocompromised people, you'll have elderly, but you can't let a small minority dictate how the rest of society functions and how they go about daily life, because you can argue that a healthy 25-year-old is at the most minimal risk of catching COVID, sure they can spread it, but why would you lock out an age range so
you're seeing that now because like these immunocompromised people still face the same risks that they faced 12 months ago, but society is no longer tailored to those people. And I still read the occasional article where they're complaining, they're saying, oh, it's BS that that we don't have all these rules and restrictions in place, but it's just not feasible to tailor your society to a very small portion, probably less than 1% of the population who are immunocompromised. Don't quote me on that, could be wrong, but a very small percentage, put it that way. You just can't tailor the society to them. They have to essentially take responsibility for their own health, and they have to know that they probably can't go out to restaurants and stuff because it's a high risk.
Yeah, I always thought the onus should be on the elderly and shut themselves away
and
if they want.
That's the way it used to be, and again, not just limited to COVID, but to anything. And now I say that's the way that we're running our society now, where that's the way it is.
That could almost be a whole nother pod, to be honest. You want to say? You finish?
Yeah, and I think, as I say, most people are okay with that now. As I say, 12 months ago, majority of people were like, nah, like, that's crazy. Like, we have to look after, the immunocompromised or the vulnerable at all costs. But now most people are like, no, actually, like, I have to look after myself. I can't look after, everyone else. And that's, as I say, we're just getting on with life. And I think that's the right way of doing it.
Fine.
Yeah, and I would argue
we haven't all died.
Like, I find the use of wearing masks a little bit tedious, but I can get behind the fact that as a society, maybe if we are experiencing cold symptoms or flu symptoms, that you just wear one anyway, just protect others around you. Yeah. But for the most part, you can't let it dictate how you go about life.
No.
Like when you're going into a restaurant, I almost feel sorry, or a cafe, you feel sorry for those who are being forced to wear them through their work while everyone else is just enjoying sitting down, eating a meal,
Yeah,
hopefully it's going to change soon. There's chat that we're going to go to green potentially in the next couple of weeks. And on that note, I read that the government was consulting the I think the wording was disabled community. I don't know if it was disabled or immunocompromised, but they're consulting like vulnerable people before making that decision. So the government is obviously still considering those people, but I think you got to drop it because again, it's just not feasible to be doing, especially as we go into summer now, and that's it, more ventilation and all that.
Yeah. It'll be a good time because then naturally the flu symptoms are going to disappear over summer, so that you can claim that. And what government isn't going to claim that? I think the whole COVID thing is just a good example of it's a happy accident at best. That it's real. It's nice and easy to manipulate and control people when that's happening. But I wonder if that's like over the years we see more and more people get access to the democracy. You got women's right to vote over women, and certain different classes of people finally getting the chance to vote. And I wonder if there was any conscious, I don't know if you want to get conspiratorial about it, but if there's any conscious thinking by those in power that they knew they're going to be easily manipulated, or it's easy to manipulate the uneducated or the uninformed through all the ways we all know with the media and
I don't know. We'll never know what went on behind closed doors, but I think certainly.
But we've seen more. It's easier when. Yeah.
I think even if they didn't know that beforehand, I think like after a month or whatever into it, they sort of quickly worked out that they can like take advantage of it with the 1 p.m. news conferences and stuff like that.
It's supposed to be free advertising for the Labour Party, isn't it?
Pretty much. Yep.
It's hard as well when you have. You're trying to make big, huge decisions for the good of the country, but then you have leadership and people in leadership that flaunt those rules. So, for example, in New Zealand, I think it was the guy who David Clark, went out biking, even though it was advised against because
it wasn't advised against. It was at that point it was outlawed. You weren't allowed to like go a certain distance from your house, and he was like went ages away into like the back country.
And then in the UK, you had like Boris Johnson having parties like.
It's almost as if those people weren't that afraid of it.
Yeah, you've had.
Weren't as afraid as they were telling us we should
Nancy
be.
Pelosi was wear maskless in
Yeah.
a hair salon. You had LA Governor Gavin Newsom, who was dining with
Yeah.
patrons like without a mask, and I think a good example for me, which was kind of like a turning point, was watching the Super Bowl, and it just seemed like you had a lot of people with wealth and arguably power in the same event, and you could just see a lot of hypocrisy that was going on
Yeah.
from different celebrities.
Yeah.
So it's very easy to push one thing and then do the complete opposite, and it's really hard as a common person to take it seriously.
And I just wonder, like, because you see this in all walks of life. Another like just common example I can think off the top of my head is like Leonardo DiCaprio being like an environmentalist, while he's got like this massive super yacht and private jet and stuff. I just wonder, like, are these people like aware of the fact that they're like contradicting themselves, or are they just that ignorant that they genuinely think that they're like doing a good thing and don't take notice of like the Justin Trudeau private jet as well? The best example in fact in New Zealand is James Shaw, who's like environmental minister or whatever, and he's got the biggest carbon footprint of any politician in New Zealand.
From all the times he flies.
Yeah. Because he goes over to conferences and stuff around Europe. He went to like Glasgow.
They'll justify it by, I need to do this in person,
but
because
then
that way I can affect more people than what I'm taking.
They tell us to do Zoom calls, so why can't they do Zoom calls? That would make sense if it's about the environment, right? And then you do your conference on Zoom, but they'll be staying in 5-star hotels and having a ball. It's just are these people like aware of that fact and the optics of that? I respect people.
Because they apologize for it, whether they mean it or not, when they get caught out.
Yeah,
so
I respect people who might have views that I disagree with, as long as they walk the talk.
Yeah.
So there's another person in the Green Party. I forget the one that when she was pregnant, she biked to the hospital because she's like not about. She doesn't drive. I was like, respect. Like, I don't believe. Like, I don't have the same views with you about like the environment or driving cars or whatnot, but you really believe that. And you walk the talk.
Yeah, it was Green MP Julie Ann Ginter.
Yeah, so like mad respect for that. Like, as long as you can have different beliefs to me, as long as you don't contradict yourself, then respect.
People looked at me real strange. Another example of that, I always respected walking the talk. Obviously, don't agree that ex-workmate thought that gays were being like gay lifestyle was completely wrong. You were going to hell, basically. But she walked that walk. She wouldn't not tell anyone. You know, she should tell them straight up, even though it was clearly not going to go well. It was going to ruin a conversation, and she'd say it straight up. I'm like, ugh. In a way, I respect that. Yeah,
I think that's just the worst thing. The worst thing you can be is pretend to be something that you're not. Even I'd far rather someone, even if they have views I strongly disagree with, and in that case, like, are quite obviously going to be offensive to someone. Yeah, it's better to
know what you're dealing with.
Yeah, rather than pretend that like you're this gay rights activist, but you actually hate gay people. Yeah, like, that's the worst thing you can be, is say that, oh, I'm this, but you're the complete opposite. Yeah. Or if you're not the complete opposite, you just do things that contradict that. Like, is that if you're an environmentalist, you can't be having the biggest carbon footprint.
That one grinds people's gears.
It's a terrible one. It's a shocker. Yeah, and also telling like other people that you shouldn't be like, you should cut back on flying and using your car and stuff like that. Like, while you have the biggest carbon footprint, like, that's just, you can't be doing that.
I think in the modern world as well, it's probably easier as a politician now to like obfuscate and hide your contradictions now, because
probably
they're so I don't know, to me anyway, the politicians just being in Wellington, I wonder if people who live in Wellington feel the same way, but it just feels so far separated from here, from where I live,
for sure. For sure, it feels like there's so many layers in between. Layers. Like, they're these distant people in their own little bubble, essentially. Yeah, for sure, politicians. Yeah.
Well, it's almost like, I think there was an example of the that coal mine down in Southland that closed down an argument for climate change. But then,
was that why it was
well,
one of the main
as a generalization.
Yeah,
but then we were known for importing coal, is energy. And so why don't you just keep it running?
I know the reason for that.
Yes.
Because my uncle taught me this, because he's a geologist. It's because the New Zealand coal is for like coking, for like burning to make like steel and stuff like that. It's a certain grade of coal which is good for that, whereas the stuff that we burn is a much lower grade of coal which is used for like heating. So there is a valid reason for that.
That's fair enough then.
And that's not to say that the plant should have been shut down, but I've heard people say like, because there's still coal mines are open on the west coast, and it's like, why aren't we burning that? Because we import it from like Indonesia. Yeah, different coal.
stuff.
So our stuff is the good
That makes
stuff.
sense.
That's
Yeah.
burns
Oh,
it
I
as-
stand corrected on
Yeah,
that.
no, like I didn't know that either, because I'd always thought that, but my uncle dropped that because he's a geologist. It's like,
Thanks,
that's cool.
Uncle.
Like, that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes good sense.
But yeah, for sure, there's certainly, again, like contradictions there with the fact that, I think like last year we burnt like more coal than in recent memory. Like the amount of coal that we burnt for energy was huge. So yeah, like there's certainly, again, like contradictions there going on with.
At the university, I studied environmental science at university, and I only found out in my third year of university that I should have noticed. It's a big old chimney stack with the city, but they had a coal burner to heat the university.
There's
and like the most
more coal burning places than you would think of. There's another place in Christchurch that burns coal. I think this is like a food place or something. There's a food place somewhere in Christchurch that burns coal. I think it's food.
You could probably go looking, just because they're always huge stacks in those
Yeah,
city areas.
and then there's multiple other places. Obviously, there's quite a few like dairy places that use coal. So yeah, there's more coal that gets burned than you think. And then I still think in like places like the West Coast and Invercargill, you still can burn coal for heating, I believe. And like in Southland, I'm pretty sure that's the case, and in West Coast. So yeah, there's more coal that gets used than you'd think.
All right, so we reckon, in terms of changing the voting age, we reckon raise, which is the only thing that's been in the news is the lowering.
Yeah,
so,
and again, like I'm viewing that pragmatically. Like I think it should be raised, but I know it won't be, and I know that's certainly not a popular opinion.
Me too. Raised and then maybe capped. We reckon for maybe a cap.
Yeah, I think that would
On
be
the
reasonable.
age.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then in terms of
Well, we have that with driver's license, right? Once you get to a certain age, you have to prove. So again, this would be like you're saying with informed, you have to prove that you're capable of driving. Yeah, perhaps that should be the case with voting as well.
Yeah. I just don't think that in informed democracy, in terms of a test, like a driver's, as easy as a driver's test, like pretty much anyone can do it if they want to learn how to drive. It's not so difficult.
No.
But I think there'd be enough of a reduction in the amount of people who want to vote at all to even take the test will be counteracted by the admin of having to sort and mark this test. But I'm still pretty keen on it, and I wouldn't be, unless I wouldn't be part of this informed democracy right now.
Perhaps
if it happened.
that could be something that will be implemented through a schooling system. That you take like your final year of school.
Yeah.
You go through something.
What preps you for the test?
Yeah, maybe you make it mandatory that you have to take like a political class in your last year of high school or something, and you get educated about like all the different facets of the political system and the economy and stuff like that, and then you have to like pass that class to participate.
Yeah. So like a test that high schoolers are pretty good at test taking by the time you're finishing high school.
You probably have to try and make it some sort of test or that
just a multi-choice.
you'd have to take
test.
out things like ideology and make it more factual.
Yeah, well, I think even if like this is done not with the intention of decreasing the voter pool, but simply educating the voter pool, like people understanding just like basic things like how an economy, the gist of how an economy runs and stuff.
What do you
like
reckon the basics would be if you had to name them?
Well, I think for starters, you got to just, because this is just a big one that I'm seeing like again recently, is like all these businesses being cut down for making profits. I think first of all you need to like have an explanation of like how profit and loss works, because like these figures can easily be sort of like manipulated. We're saying like, oh, profits increased by such and such, but you've got to like look at profit margin to like be deciding whether like this company's like ripping you off or not. Because if they've just
if it's just a number of profits, it could
Yeah,
be,
like,
it could be 1% or
yeah,
it could
exactly.
Be
So like
50%.
if they've doubled their revenue, meaning that they're doing business with more people, like that's, and they haven't really increased their profit margin, then they're not like ripping you off sort of thing. But yeah, just things like that. And I think just like really basic things like you're also understanding like it's good if companies are making profits, because companies that are making healthy profits are likely to keep people employed, give people pay rises, employ more new people, as well as the tax revenue is going to be higher, which is good if you think the government should be getting taxes. The worst thing that a company can be doing is having profits that are, or barely making profits, or profits that are being decreased because they're going to start laying people off. So it's good to have companies making healthy profits.
Yeah, I think then you also argue that you have different periods of time in a company where they might go through growth stages. So there will be bigger operational costs that occur.
Like one that I'm seeing, and this is happening around the world at the moment, which is absolutely bonkers. I think it's even happening in the UK. They're introducing windfall taxes, which is they're taxing, giving companies like a large one-off tax because they've made profits for something that they're not responsible for. So they're doing it to oil companies because the price of oil has gone up because of the war in Ukraine. And they're saying, well, you're not responsible for that, so it's unfair that you're making all this money, so we're putting like a one-time 25% tax on you.
Wow.
But that's crazy.
They won't do it the other way when they're
Exactly. So that's crazy to me, because that's it. The oil companies are doing great currently, but they won't last forever. And nobody feels sorry for the oil companies. Like after COVID, when oil went down to like $30 a barrel, and there was glut of oil, and companies going broke everywhere, going out of business everywhere because no one wanted oil.
Great for consumers.
Yeah, so like it was awesome. Petrol like $1.80 a litre or something. Less than that. Yeah. So just because the company's doing amazingly right now doesn't mean that that's always going to be the case. In most cases, it won't be. So yeah, those companies are lucky at the moment that they're profiting from something that's essentially not good, a war, but that war will only last so long.
Yeah, that is
wackadoo. Already the price of oil has come down heaps. It's like, I think the last time I checked, it was like $87 a barrel. It was as high as 120 or 130. So it's come way down. And the last time oil was like over $100 a barrel, I believe, was just before the last recession of 2008. So oil companies it hasn't been great for oil companies the past 10 years. And it's probably not great the next 10 years because people are phasing out of oil, using oil, or trying to. So like, yeah, just because they're doing great in this one like 12-month window, like you can't be like, like we're going to tax the hell out of you, when they kind of need to make the money while the sun is shining, so they have the cash reserves for when times are tough, as they were like just a year or two ago. And it was only like, the companies that had enough cash reserves and business loans, access to credit, that could ride out the pandemic. A lot of companies didn't. A lot of oil companies went bust because they didn't have the cash reserves. And so
a lot of companies went bust.
It's crazy to me, that train of thought. Yeah.
So you reckon? So if you had to boil that down, you just say understand how a business works.
Yeah, and understand like things like economic conditions are not static; they're dynamic. Just because a company's doing awesome at the moment doesn't mean that they're going to be doing awesome for the foreseeable future.
Yeah.
You see that, in particular, you see that with like companies like oil companies, which are highly cyclical. Airlines are highly cyclical as well.
There's a huge difference between like a growth company that's starting out, or a value company that's been around for years.
I think, like, ironically, like there's probably a lot of companies out there that, and I don't have an issue with this, but there's a lot of companies that you wouldn't think about that their profit margins are much higher than those of like supermarkets, like tech companies. Like companies like Microsoft, probably their net profit margin is much higher than that of a oil company, because they're primarily in the business of software, where like once you've created the software, it can be like replicated an infinite number of times. Essentially, they still have costs, of course, but relative to a physical product where there's like a limit on the scale, as opposed to like, if you think about it, if this is oversimplification, but if you make like a piece of software, now you can sell that an infinite number of times. You don't have to keep building the software. Of course, there's still updates and stuff, but as a general, but with an oil, you always have to have a physical barrel of oil.
Yes.
Yeah, there'll be certain companies that deal with commodities.
Yeah.
So, like for example, food companies making corn chips might have to deal with the cost of corn.
Yes. There's probably companies out there that nobody's like sort of accusing of like being, and again, that's not to say that they are ripping you off, but have much fatter profit margins than some of the companies that people are vilifying.
Yes.
There's probably a lot of tech companies that have much tidier profit margins than oil companies, supermarkets certainly who don't have high profit margins, building companies. Fletcher's is another one that was getting criticised recently, and I checked their profit margin. The net profit margin is 5.4%. That's not a big profit margin, but they do $8 billion in revenue. So that comes out at like $430 million profits. That's a big number, but the profit margin is not fat. It's only 5%. It's the fact that they're doing enormous numbers of business.
Yeah. You brought it up as well, like with the businesses, it's so easy to kind of skew the numbers, and this actually particularly annoys me. It kind of angers me actually. The meaningless numbers, and it happened with the COVID thing, is, or when there's like a government spending, say, to keep it on topic, there's a government spending and they say government spending $250 million on this like cycle project or whatever, and people are like outraged about the number, but without knowing what percentage of a budget that is, it's just a massive number. It doesn't,
exactly.
And so like with the COVID thing, they're saying so and so deaths, like even worldwide, 1 million deaths this year or the last 6 months. I'm like, people just go, "Well, it's a massive number. Oh shit, it's
and
scary."
you don't think about
how many is that?
You don't think about
is that not a lot?
Yeah, like you don't think about how many people just die every year worldwide. I think the number is something like, I could be way off. This could be for a specific country, but I feel like 27 million is a figure of people who die every year. I'm not sure if that's worldwide. It's probably worldwide. I don't know if that's a reasonable number. It sounds a reasonable number.
Sounds reasonable. But like
so it's like lots of people die, but you're not thinking about that. You're like coming from a position as though like no one dies and 1 million people die from COVID. Yeah, it's like,
and then you have people, kids, babies born every second.
And then with the businesses, it's like one huge business making a 1% profit margin. They could say we've made $10 million this year.
But that number could easily turn negative if you like slap a tax or a regulation on them.
But then a small business, like you're saying in the growth stage or whatever, making a 50% profit margin, but it's only small, so they made $200,000 for the year, and it doesn't sound as good.
Yeah,
but
a lot of companies
starting making more per person.
Less.
Yes, the meaningless figures are. It's definitely intentional. There's no way it's not intentional.
Definitely
just
intentional.
Like, this is a massive number. This is going to elicit a gut reaction.
The other thing with like one of the articles I was reading the other day is where they're like talking about all these companies and their profit margins have significantly increased compared to the last 2 years. You also have to factor in that the last 2 years we had lockdowns and all sorts of troubles. It's been natural that they are now significantly increased compared to periods when you had lockdowns and stuff.
And that's another example. That is the since records began, hottest temperatures since records began,
since
and the records began like right at the end of the last mini ice age.
Yeah, that's a classic.
Well, not mini ice age, but the solar minimum.
I think as well, when you get certain periods of time,
so
say at the moment, you're dealing with supply shortages, and a courier, for example, with dealing with oil and the cost of fuel, although fuel might increase in a certain period of time, and the cost will get passed on to the consumer in terms of if they raise their prices for inflation. When you see the cost of fuel drop, for example, you will never see those prices pass back down. So on paper, it's very different when you're looking. If you look at the numbers, you might have an exorbitant amount of revenue one year, whereas the next year it's different because there's so many different factors that go into it. It's not, that's one example.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, I think I remember the job where I'm working at, with inflation up 7+%, the cost of sending something's gone up 8.1%.
Yeah,
inflation also murks those random big numbers as well.
Yeah,
because that is another completely different effect on how much that is actually truly worth. But you can with the money and figures like that, you can make it sound great or horrible, depending on your slant. It's so obvious, and people lap it up. And a big scary number. Anything over 1 million is a big scary number.
Yeah, you kind of need to sort of zoom out a bit and just look at it from the bigger picture.
I would love if the government or councils referred to, even after the sum figure, as a percentage of the total budget for
Yeah,
the year,
yeah.
then I could
Yeah,
gauge, okay,
yeah,
it's not worth
no.
spending half of the council's budget
Yeah.
on this cycleway,
No, that's
but
definitely
maybe 10%.
a good one when it comes to government numbers. Like, this is just so huge that they
Yeah.
just get lost in a sea of like, you just don't, you
Everything's
can't
huge.
comprehend
You
them.
can't
Yeah,
comprehend it because
No.
you may be earning 55 to 60k a year,
Yeah.
and then you're dealing with numbers in the hundreds of millions
Yeah.
to billions
Yeah,
of
and
dollars.
The government proudly announces $200 and something million on the education system. I
which
don't know
might be
how much is
yeah,
that a
might be
lot? I don't
stuff
know.
all yeah, because then I 100% agree with that. Yeah, you
Yeah.
need
It
them as
pisses
like
me off, man.
percentages. Yeah,
Makes me take an L.
Yeah. Do you think we should just wrap it up there? I think
Yep.
covered quite a bit,
That was good. Yeah.
quite a few juicy topics.
Yep.
Raise voting age, cap it, informed democracy, probably not plausible, but
Not
Daniel-
right
Daniel
now,
likes it.
anyway. I would say,
yeah.
but
Yeah, that could be a future thing when we're a more advanced civilization.
Yeah, more wise and patient.
Hopefully we'll
Hopefully
get
that
there.
happens.
Yeah,
Hopefully we're going in that
hopefully.
direction.
sweet. We'll end it there. That's it for
Alright.
episode 3.
Deuces.
We'll
Until next time.
until the next time, episode 4. We'll see you then.
Bye-bye.
Peace out.